I don't agree with Trump politically, but one can dislike the content of what he's doing, but also say that he's extremely skillful at doing it. There's a burden on the scarce resource, which is attention. And so if you can completely dominate the information channels, then you can actually have considerable success in setting the agenda of action.
I mean, yeah, on the topic of Trump, he's just been elected. Well, rather than elected, he's just taken office in America. And this episode will be coming out about 2 weeks from when we're recording this now. So it'll still be quite timely. I was wondering what you think about, or what you've thought about his first few days in office.
Well, I don't agree with Trump politically, but if one simply looks at his skill as a manipulator of communications and audience attention, he's done quite a good job. I think the content of many of the executive orders that he has released in a blizzard, the content of some of them is absolutely dreadful. For example, taking away birthright citizenship, which is clearly written in the Constitution. And there's several others where he is gone against law. But by essentially swamping the system with his information, he's been able to totally dominate the agenda. Makes it difficult then for opponents to organize to defeat any particular aspect of his blitzkrieg. So one can dislike the content of what he's doing, but also say that he's extremely skillful at doing it. After all, he did come up on reality television, where the trick is to make sure that if you say something outrageous, before you can be corrected, go on to the next outrageous thing, and or leave your opponents back trying to unscramble the previous outrageous thing while you go to a third. Trump is extremely good at this.
Yeah, I read that in your latest book, A Life in the American Century, in your chapter on Trump and Biden. And it seems to me a lot of your grievances, not solely, but partly have to do with Trump's style and his form of communication and his, let's say, the way he grabs attention to push his own agenda.
Well, one has to, as a political analyst, one has to distinguish style from substance. You can admire his ability to manipulate the system of communication without admiring the ethics of it, either in content or in style. After all, if you look back historically, Adolf Hitler was brilliant at manipulating the new media of radio and movies, but that doesn't mean he was a good man.
I don't suppose there's any kind of truth there in the comparison between Hitler and Trump. I think some people would take, well, I would at least take some pushback. I would give some pushback to that. I don't know if that's an analogy or...
I was not making the analogy of Trump and Hitler. What I was trying to make was a broader analytical point that when one does an analysis, one can distinguish the nature of the skill in using communications from the moral justification of it. I don't think Trump is like Hitler, but I think that both of these men are brilliant at manipulating communications, just like Franklin Roosevelt was brilliant at mastering radio in the United States, which was a new medium at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I obviously don't mean to say that was the kind of point you're making. I think it's interesting when it comes to comparing, let's say, historical figures with current figures, that those waters are also treaded quite carefully. Let's say, I don't know if you well, you must have seen Musk's recent salute while giving a speech. I think maybe first of all, it might be interesting to hear your thoughts of that before we can kind of break that down.
Well, I don't know how to interpret it. I've seen a couple of pictures and some things that are quoted from social media, but I can't give you a judgment call on that. I don't know what it meant.
No, fair enough. I mean, just on the topic of Musk, as we relate back to Trump as well, I wanted to maybe focus in on one point which I heard come up quite often while doing research for the interview, while listening to a couple of your talks as well, and that's the idea that there's been a shift from horizontal power to vertical power. And for our audience listening, that is to say, there's more and more non-government actors taking power within states. So maybe for our listeners and for our audience, how relevant, first of all, do you think this is to international relations more broadly?
Well, I think if you look at what's happening with information and communications today, what you see is an increase in the extraordinary amount of information that's being conveyed, which then means there's a burden on the scarce resource, which is attention. And so if you can completely dominate the information channels, then you can actually have considerable success in setting the agenda of action. So if you think of what does this mean in terms of international relations, you have many more actors who have access to these channels of communication. And that means that they can play a larger role in agenda setting. The days in which you had a few major elite newspapers who would determine the agenda for the government are eroded, or if not gone. And nowadays, if you have a podcast or a million followers on social media, you can do a lot to control the agenda. So what you've had with the rise of the internet, social media, this will be increased even more by artificial intelligence, is more actors working at lower costs to them, so the price of entry is down, and working at much greater speeds, and all this targeted on an amount of attention which doesn't increase. So that does make a change.
Is that necessarily a bad thing, that more actors kind of have that power? I don't know if it's necessarily bad to kind of give, it kind of democratizes the media to some extent.
It does, and there are good aspects and there are bad aspects of it. The good aspects of it is that you have more people able to express a broader agenda. The bad aspects of it is that it can be manipulated. If you have the ability to set up a bot, you can swamp a social media platform with messages which are highly biased. So it's a mixed bag.
Yeah, just on that point, I was wondering what you thought about Trump and his relationship with X, especially now that Elon Musk kind of owns X, formerly known as Twitter.
I think without social media and the internet, it's hard to see that Trump would have been elected. But that goes back to my point that whether you like it or not, you have to admire his skill.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I kind of wanted to quickly, before moving on to maybe the broader theoretical aspect of things, focus a little bit on Trump in relation to Ukraine, because this is one of the more pressing issues, I think, which he hasn't spoken too much about. So he signed lots of executive orders. There hasn't been too much going on about Ukraine, I feel. How likely do you think it is that Trump now purposefully weakens Ukraine's position economically or through some form of soft power in order to reach a ceasefire on his terms, maybe on Russia's terms as well?
Well, I wrote a column about this a month or so ago before the inauguration, saying that Trump prides himself in unpredictability. So we really don't know what he's going to do. And what I said in the column is if he continues to strengthen Ukraine's position to get a ceasefire in place, rather than letting Putin claim the 4 provinces that he has invaded but not been able to fully control or annex, then you would have something where you could not call it a complete victory, but you could call it a partial victory for Ukraine. If, on the other hand, he deprives Zelensky and Ukraine of military assistance, so that Putin feels that he's got a guarantee that if he presses ahead, he will prevail on objectives such as those I just mentioned, or even more, then I think you'll have something which will be widely seen as a defeat. And I think that defeat is not good for Ukraine. It's not good for Europe. It's not good for NATO. And we'll have to see what Trump does. But he's so unpredictable that I don't begin to know the answer.
How hopeful are you for not only the future of America, but a future where countries can be more cooperative with each other?
Since the Americans had become the most powerful country, if they didn't help promote some degree of international order, it wouldn't be produced at all.
A large part of this situation that we've ended up in is due to Western hypocrisy.
And I think that defeat is not good for Ukraine, it's not good for Europe, it's not good for NATO. If you look at history, you'll see that we have come through worse periods. After all, in the 1930s, Franklin Roosevelt thought we might be at the death knell of democracy in America.
Hi guys, we hope you enjoyed that clip from our episode with Joseph Nye. If you want to check out the full interview, you can click right here. In the meantime, don't forget to like and subscribe. Comment down below.